DMS webinar. I wanted to take a moment to express my appreciation to each of you for your efforts to serve children with disabilities under extremely trying circumstances. I know in our office, we've had to pivot and adapt and be resilient in order to continue to carry on our basic functions. I recognize that you've had to do the same at the state and local levels. Masking and vaccination efforts so that we can reopen schools and early intervention services safely have not always been met with acceptance by communities. I know that sometimes you're even at odds with your own state and local governments. We know that there are critical staff shortages at local levels and perhaps at the state as well, and that those shortages have a disproportionate effect on children with disabilities, particularly those children of color, English language learners, low-income children, and children experiencing homelessness. I don't have to tell you that all this has produced a tremendous amount of stress. And as we approach the holidays, I want to reflect on your efforts to continue to provide services during these very difficult times. I hope that you will spend some time relaxing, recharging, and enjoying your families and friends during the holiday break. I also wanted to mention our concern for the storm-ravaged communities, Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, other states that were devastated by last week's tornadoes. Our hearts go out to those families and the communities that were so heavily impacted by the storms. I am encouraged by the tremendous humanitarian outpouring to help those individuals and those communities rebuild. Here's to a better, brighter 2022. We have had good news in our office. We now have an OSEP director, Ms. Valerie Williams, and I'm going to turn this call over to David Cantrell, who will introduce Valerie. David?
Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to speak with you today, and I'm really excited to welcome our new colleague to OSEP, Valerie Williams, as our director. Valerie began on Monday this week, and it's been a fast and furious week, but I'm so looking forward to working closely with her, and I know she will be a great leader to work closely with all of you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Valerie, and she will say a few words to everyone. Valerie. Valerie, turn your volume on. You're still on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much. Don't want to take up too much time, but I just wanted to jump on really quickly and say a few things. One, I want to echo Greg's sentiments. I want to thank everybody who is listening under the sound of my voice. Thank you for your work. Thank you for staying. The last 18 to 24 months has been extremely trying for everyone, but you are still here and you are still trying and you are still working on behalf of students. And we greatly appreciate that because the times have been difficult. I'm excited, not just to be in this seat, but also because we're at a pivotal point. And I think we have the opportunity to make some changes that are going to make a difference and move the needle on how students with disabilities are educated. And I look forward to all the collaborations and everything that we will do together in the near future. So I just wanted to say hello. I'm going to turn it back over to Greg.
Thank you, Valerie. And with that, I am going to turn it over to, I believe, Kate, are you next in the run of show here?
I am. Thanks so much,
great,
Greg.
Kate.
And welcome aboard, Valerie. We're very excited to have you with us. So Swati, if you'd like to move to the next slide. I just wanted to walk through our agenda today. My colleagues, Dwight Thomas and Brenda Wilkins, will be joining me We're going to spend some time diving a little bit deeper into two of our protocols that we have referenced throughout the last couple of months as we have been talking through our DMS 2.0 process. So those two protocols, the integrated monitoring and sustaining compliance and improvement protocols, we will talk about the definition within that, how it fits in our framework, overarching questions, and the historical findings within that. Briefly, I'm going to review some of the information that we've talked about on some of the other calls, the protocol structure, general supervision, and where we see results in our monitoring process. Just to touch on that information, we have talked about it, but again, we recognize sometimes folks may not be on some of those earlier calls, so we don't want to lose sight of that information and really want to make sure that we're grounding this work as we start to utilize these new protocols, and also to provide you, our state, with as much support, information, and knowledge about this work that we're trying to make it as transparent as possible as we begin to engage with you. So next slide, please. So again, all of this falls under the general supervision responsibilities for states under 300.600 for Part B and 303.700. The ultimate goal of that general supervision structure is on the improved educational results and functional outcomes, and then ensuring that you, our states, are monitoring your local LEA and EIS programs to have that emphasis on these requirements, which are related to improving educational results and for children with disabilities. Next slide. Again, we want to talk about the fact that this DMS 2.0 process is balancing that compliance component and expectation in IDEA and the results. So we don't want to lose sight of the excellent result work that states have been doing around the OSEP and other areas, but also looking at compliance and how you are meeting the requirements of IDEA. So looking at general supervision and how you're working with your local program, how we'll be using these protocols, which include those results components, and looking at performance. So within each of the protocols, we have talked about this. You'll see this in some of the questions that we're going to talk about today, where it may look at the identification of noncompliance and then how a state would be looking at improved results. So not only are you identifying perhaps what some localities may be doing incorrectly, making a written finding, but then also how are you evaluating throughout your state performance? So are you looking at those that are high performing? Are you looking at those that are hitting in the middle? How are you addressing those that may be lower performing? What steps are you taking and what analysis are you engaging in? Because all of those pieces fit together to create this general supervision system that helps us implement IDEA and then ultimately leads to these improved results for our infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities. Next slide, please. So the two protocols that we will be talking about today, we've provided you the links to those here. Again, those are on our IDEA website under resources for grantees and the topic of DMS. We've provided you the direct links here. It is a downloadable Word document. So any state at this point, whether you are in cohort or not, you are able to download these protocols and use them within your system to really address or assess how your state system is meeting the requirements under IDEA. Next slide, please. So again, this is our puzzle pieces that we have shown. Today, we wanted to highlight that we're going to be pulling out two of those puzzle pieces, talking about integrated monitoring and sustaining compliance and improvement. And we think about these two pieces, integrated monitoring, dealing with the identification of noncompliance and improved results, and then sustaining compliance and improvement, when we're thinking about the correction of that non-compliance, and again, how you're addressing performance. So are you looking at the high performing? Are you looking at the low performing, and how that fits into your analysis? Next slide. So the protocol structure, each protocol is set up so that it has a group of overarching questions that we have separated out within the protocols. And underneath that overarching question, you will find general information that is connected to the requirement. So it basically is looking at what that question is getting at. So if it's talking about the identification of noncompliance, it would have statements below it saying the state would have blah, 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 the state would do X, Y, and Z. And there would be items within it that would really explain what the expectation is that we would be looking for a state to have in place to ensure that it's meeting what that question is asking about. Possible follow-up questions are additional questions that the monitoring team may or may not ask, depending on how the conversation is going, depending on some of the information that we already may have. And some of the questions may not be relevant to your particular state. So those possible follow-up questions are just that. They're possible follow-up questions. And then the areas or issues for follow-up are items that could lead to a finding of non-compliance if verified as true. Some of them may just be areas that we want to be aware of and that we may follow up with technical assistance. And others may be there because they are pieces of our puzzle that we take into account that help us as we triangulate information across different areas that could lead to a finding, that could not. So we don't want to have you read those and say, oh no, if I have this, it's going to be a finding, etc. I think they're exactly that. They are areas or issues for follow-up that most likely, if you have one of them, so let's say if you are not issuing written findings of non-compliance, that would be something that you would want to most likely you'll need to correct and fix, but other items in that list may not be a direct item that you would have to fix. So you'll be working very closely with your monitoring team on this protocol when you are engaged in our DMS monitoring process. Outside of the DMS monitoring process, we highly, highly recommend that you begin working through these with your TA providers. They are going to be the ones that can help you sort out some of those areas or issues for follow-up that you could begin to fix now prior to OSEP coming. Next slide, please. All right, so we want to walk through the DMS framework that is posted on the website. Swati is going to put it in the chat there as well. And that little puzzle piece that's on this slide is hyperlinked. So when we post the PowerPoint after today's presentation, you'll be able to access it there. So our DMS monitoring framework is set up in a structure that each component has an if and some then statements into our intended outcome. So when we're talking about if a state has an effective integrated monitoring system, then we would see a state that's continuously examining and analyzing data across multiple sources to evaluate its performance of its LEA and EIS programs for improved results and compliance. In addition, the state would be identifying noncompliance with procedural and programmatic requirements and would be making recommendations for performance improvements, followed by the state requiring the LEA and program to correct that identified noncompliance. Ultimately, all leading to that intended outcome of an effective integrated monitoring system will contribute to improved outcomes for infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities and their families. We've included in this framework as well examples of evidence. Some of these are more specific documents or items than you may see on the protocols themselves, but they're very much connected. The items that are on this framework align with the then statement. So our protocols generally outline the documents we'd be looking for related to integrated monitoring. These just tend to categorize it a little bit more. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Brenda Wilkins, who's going to walk through the overview questions, talk a little bit more about these suggested documents for review that we'll be looking at, and then talking through some previous findings that we've made in this area. Brenda?
Thank you, Kate, for that introduction. Next slide, Swati. Okay, so I'd like to go into a little more detail on integrated monitoring and the protocol. Integrated monitoring specifically asks your state if you have a general supervision system that is reasonably designed to identify noncompliance and address improved results and functional outcomes in a timely manner. This is exactly what Kate just went over. So I really want to talk about the component definition of integrated monitoring as well. So number one, and most importantly, Kate went over, is that it's a multifaceted process. It's designed to examine and evaluate each state's general supervision system with an emphasis on improved educational results, functional outcomes, and of course, compliance with IDEA. Next slide, Swati. So, so you've seen this before. It is the suggested monitoring documents for review that we will be asking for as we start monitoring your state during phase one. Again, this list is not exhaustive. So we could ask for more or less documentation. So the first thing I want to go into is the state's risk assessment. So under the uniform guidance under 200.332, Part B program specifically must conduct risk assessments of its sub-recipients, which is LEAs, and use those results of the risk assessment to inform monitoring. Although this requirement is not applied to Part C, because Part C does not have sub-recipients, we do recommend risk assessments of providers as a best practice. Excuse me. Secondly, as far as the DMS process, reviewing policies and procedures is a key component during phase one. It is important for the monitoring team to gain a detailed understanding of your system for identifying noncompliance. Specifically, what are the components of your state's general supervision system? The documentation of procedures should include your methods for identifying noncompliance as well. What are they? Are they desk audits, self-assessments, programmatic reviews? What are your components or your methods that you utilize to in your state general supervision system to identify noncompliance? Timelines are also very important. Specifically, are there certain points in time where you issue findings? How do you look at your data when you're identifying noncompliance? Is it yearly? Is it quarterly? And which component of your system are you utilizing in order to identify that noncompliance? Lastly, I would like to just emphasize that we would like to see a sample of your monitoring protocols. What is your SEA or lead agency utilizing when you are identifying noncompliance and notifying your local programs of that noncompliance that you identified? Next slide, Swati. So here are the overarching questions. I'm not going to go into all of the questions in detail, but basically the monitoring overarching questions kind of just outlines what a state's monitoring system or monitoring manual should actually look like. But I want to focus on two overarching questions that I would like to highlight. And the first one is B. This question touches on how the state uses its data system to identify noncompliance. Does the state look at specific indicators? What points in time do you pull your data to identify that noncompliance? And how do you use that data and noncompliance that you identified to inform your programs and to improve outcomes for children? The Next slide, please. Thank you. So the second question I would like to highlight on this slide is question G. So a state may have several different components in their general supervision system to identify noncompliance. Essentially, OSEP would like to learn what those components are, how and when your state utilizes these different components. Let me give you a quick example. In focus monitoring could be a component of your general supervision system. What areas are you looking at when you do focus monitoring? For example, in part C, do you look at indicator 1, indicator 7 or 8? And based on that review, or based on that review, whether it's desk scholars or a self-assessment, does your if you do that focus monitoring, how do you identify those local programs to be monitored or receive focus monitoring? Do they have to meet a certain target? If those targets are not met, does this prompt for a more detailed focus monitoring? And at what point in time does your general supervision process, does focus monitoring occur? Is it early in the year? Is it middle of the year? So those are the type of things that we would like to learn as we review your policies. This is just one example. Next slide, Swati. So I want to go into a few examples of findings that OSEP identified over the past few years. I'm going to have around 2 or 3 part C and maybe a couple of part B examples. So the first one here is a part C example where the state staff reported to OSEP that they have been making findings through their data system when a threshold of 25% non-compliance was identified in relation to a specific requirement. The use of a 25% threshold or any threshold to identify non-compliance is not consistent with Part C IDEA requirements. If non-compliance is identified, a state cannot use a threshold and a finding must be issued as soon as possible. Next slide. So the next Part C finding example, OSEP found that this state had a general supervision system that had 2 separate components. One was its on-site monitoring, which was program reviews and focus monitoring, and then its dispute resolution process. When OSEP was interviewing the state, they found that they couldn't conclude that the on-site monitoring component was reasonably designed to identify noncompliance because the state did not have a standard for identifying noncompliance or a standard for what constitutes what noncompliance is. So this kind of goes back to my previous statement that I made, is that there should be a target or a standard that identifies what that noncompliance looks like. And if what that noncompliance looks like if an EIS program is not performing up to standards, and what prompts the state to require issuing noncompliance or any type of more detailed monitoring. Next slide. So this is a Part B. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm moving too fast, Swati. I'm sorry. This is a Part B example. Based on OSEP's review of this particular state, OSEP found that the state did not have, during a certain reporting period, a general supervision in place that monitored to ensure compliance with program requirements. In addition to that, the state did not make written findings notifying the districts of noncompliance for issues that did not rise to the level of a pattern or practice that the state identified. So in terms of that, OSEP concluded that the state did not have a system in place to identify noncompliance in a timely manner. And lastly, importantly, the state could not provide actual documentation that it monitored programs providing preschool services to children with disabilities as well. So that prompted the finding for this particular state. Next slide, please, Swati. So in this next example is really interesting. OSEP concluded that in reviewing the state's general supervision components, that they did not have a general supervision system designed to identify noncompliance, of course. Specifically, the state issued written findings of noncompliance 5 months after the discovery of noncompliance. And additionally, when the state identified noncompliance, based on their 60-day timeline and discipline data, they did not issue written findings for more than 4 months after receiving that data. So in conclusion, for the state to meet its general supervision responsibility, they must provide written documentation of findings as soon as possible after the state concludes that an LEA is in noncompliance, which OSEP expects a finding to be made generally in less than 3 months from the time the state educational agency or SEA discovers the noncompliance. So these are just a few examples of findings that we have. I'm going to turn it back over to Kate, and she will go into sustaining compliance. And then Dwight, my colleague, will talk more about additional examples. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. So next slide, please, Swati. This again is just a return to our framework. We wanted to walk through this area as well. So looking at the state system, if a state has a system designed to sustain compliance and improvement, they will be using a system of incentives and sanctions to ensure continued improvement in and IDEA compliance. So again, the results and the compliance. The state will also look at its LEA and EIS programs to develop and implement improvement activities and corrective actions to address areas in need of improvement and noncompliance. And finally, the state will verify that the LEA or EIS program has implemented improvement activities and corrected the noncompliance. So the identification piece has occurred. Now the LEA and EIS program, the state needs to verify that it has corrected that noncompliance. And ultimately, the intended outcome being that the state would have a system designed to sustain compliance and improvement that will contribute to improved outcomes for infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities. Again, just making sure states are aware of these examples of evidence that may be helpful as you're assessing your system. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dwight Thomas, who's going to walk us through the Sustaining Compliance and Improvement Protocol and provide more examples on previous findings that we've made in this area. So Dwight, take it away.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Brenda. Swati, next slide, please. So I will be going over the Sustaining Compliance and Improvement Protocol. Just as it was mentioned earlier regarding the structure of the integrated monitoring protocol, the improvement protocol is set up the very same way. So the improvement protocol displays for each overarching question, general information, which is a list of statements about what the state would need to effectively answer the question, possible follow-up questions, which are designed to more closely examine areas addressed by the general information, and areas or issues for follow-up. What's important about this slide is that this slide shows OSEP's definition of sustaining compliance and improvement, which is defined as a system for recognizing and improving compliance and results, including the use of improvement activities, incentives, and sanctions. Next slide, please. The improvement protocol has a list of suggested documents, just like the integrated monitoring protocol. These lists of documents are not exhaustive. However, it's important to review these documents during phases 1 and 2. And so for phase 1, the suggested documents to review include guidance documents provided by the state and or made available to the public, state's written policies and procedures, documentation of correction procedures, and procedures used to identify and assess improved results. Very often, we are asked, what does OSEP consider to be guidance documents? Guidance documents are any documents provided by the state to its local programs and or to the public that describe, explain, or interpret the steps and procedures that should be taken to comply with the IDEA requirements. In many cases, these documents have been provided to its local directors and coordinators via some type of memo, communication, and or posted on the state's website. Another bullet I like to point out on this slide is the documentation of correction piece. Just as states should have available a written notification to its local programs of any identified noncompliance, the state should also have available documentation of the correction of the noncompliance when such has occurred. Next slide, please. So these next two slides display the overarching questions found within the improvement protocol. I will not read each question, but rather highlight just a few. For this slide, questions B and C are related to how the state determines that a finding of noncompliance has been corrected and how the state verifies that individual child-specific noncompliance is corrected. Hopefully these two questions sound very familiar. These particular questions are related to OSEP's Memorandum 0902, which we commonly refer to simply as OSEP's Memo 0902. So OSEP's Memo 0902, which was also explained during last month's National TA call related to DMS, it reiterates the steps a state must take in order to report that the previously identified noncompliance has been corrected. For any state directors and coordinators who may have just arrived and are new to our world, I would strongly encourage you to review OSEP's Memo 0902 and also review your state's annual performance reports that are submitted annually to OSEP. Next slide. For this slide, I just want to highlight question J. What is the role of the State Advisory Panel or State Interagency Coordinating Council in the state's efforts in sustaining compliance and improvement for students with disabilities? I'm pointing this out because we all know that you all have these ongoing meetings, but you do not want to forget about maintaining documentation on how the state solicited the feedback on the state's efforts to sustain compliance and improvement, and how the state regularly reviews results and compliance data with its advisory panel and ICC. Next slide, please. The next few slides, I will provide some examples of conclusions and findings, just as Brenda did with the integrated monitoring protocol, but these will pertain to the sustaining compliance and improvement protocol. These are findings that OSEP has previously made pertaining to states' general supervision responsibility to timely correct identified noncompliance. This particular example was concluded because OSEP found that the state had timely corrected some findings of noncompliance and subsequently corrected additional findings of noncompliance through the state's on-site monitoring activity. In addition, OSEP found that through the state's data system, the state had timely corrected one finding of noncompliance, but had not timely corrected 3 findings of identified noncompliance. Because of this inconsistency and the state not being able to timely correct identified noncompliance, OSEP determined that the state's system for correcting noncompliance was not reasonably designed. Next slide, please. Thank you. In this example, OSEP found the state system not reasonably designed to correct identified noncompliance because the state was not able to demonstrate they were able to correct and verify the correction of the identified noncompliance. This particular finding was made as a result of the state not taking the steps a state must take to verify identified noncompliance as described in OSEP's Memo 0902. Just as a reminder, there are 2 prongs in addressing noncompliance in accordance with OSEP's Memo 0902. In verifying correction of noncompliant, states must First, describe correction of each individual case of noncompliance unless the child is no longer within the jurisdiction of the local program. And two, describe how the state verified that the source of noncompliance is correctly implementing the regulatory requirements based on a review of updated data, such as data subsequently collected through on-site monitoring or a state data system. Next slide, please. These next couple of slides were pertain to conclusions and findings made in under Part B of IDEA. In this example, OSEP actually concluded the state demonstrated that it had a general supervision system of correcting identified noncompliance, with the exception of the state not having a mechanism to ensure correction of individual items of noncompliance that were noted by the state. Just as a reminder, in accordance with OSEP's Memo 902, in order for a state to demonstrate previously identified noncompliance has been corrected, the state must account for all instances of noncompliance and, if needed, change or require its local programs to change its policies, procedures, and practices that contributed to or resulted in noncompliance. Next slide, please. In this example, OSEP concluded the state system was not reasonably designed to correct all identified noncompliance for multiple reasons. OSEP found within several of the state's monitoring reports, the state reported that an LEA had noncompliance that was not timely corrected. And in several instances, the noncompliance dated back 2 or 3 years. In addition, OSEP found that the state did not have any documentation the state had notified the LEA to indicate the identified noncompliance had been timely corrected, and the basis for that conclusion. If you recall in our earlier slides, when I spoke about the improvement protocol having a list of suggested documents to review, I mentioned documentation of the correction of identified noncompliance procedures. Such documentation at a minimum should include the actual notification of correction, methods for determining correction of identified noncompliance, sanctions for outstanding areas of noncompliance not corrected within 1 year of the state's identification of the noncompliance, and incentives used to improve local programs' compliance and results. Next slide, please. In this last example, OSEP concluded that when the state identifies noncompliance as child-specific rather than systemic, it does not review updated data or otherwise monitor to ensure that the LEA is currently implementing the specific regulatory requirements that form the basis of the finding of noncompliance. And again, in accordance with OSEP's Memo 902, in order for a state to verify previously identified noncompliance has actually been corrected, the state must determine in each local program with identified noncompliance, the program is correctly implementing the specific regulatory requirements. This must be based on the state's review of updated data, such as data from subsequent on-site monitoring activities or data collected through a state data system. I believe now I will turn it back over to Kate.
Thank you so much, Dwight. Next slide, please, Swati. So the last slide, we just wanted to highlight a resource that is also available to states that will support your analysis, your review of your system. ECTA, DAISY, NCSI, and IDC developed this resource collaboratively. It's a state guide on identifying, correcting, and reporting on noncompliance. And then there is a companion visual representation. So included in that information is info about timelines and how to issue and setting up your structure. So they are available as a resource as you begin to evaluate, complete your protocols, think about your structure, and evaluate its compliance with IDEA. So with that, we will open it up for questions. We've answered a couple in the chat, and there is the Q&A, but you can feel free to use the hand raise capability at this point. I will highlight, Swati, just before you hop on to do that. One of the questions in the chat was around the protocols. Are we posting additional protocols? What about technical assistance? We mentioned on a previous call that we feel that TA crosses all of these components, and that already within the protocols are questions that talk about how you are evaluating and assessing technical assistance needs within your state program, how you're figuring that out. And so we've incorporated that particular component within each of the protocols. And Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about phase 2 and some of the thinking that we have within that? I don't know if you're off
Yes.
video yet. I can't see you. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. There you are.
okay. Yeah, I thought I was on. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you. I've been lurking in the background as my colleagues took the control here, which was great to see. But just as a follow-up to what Kate said, for phase 2, we've indicated earlier, and we'll be providing additional information that the phase 2 process will be a follow-up on implementation of some of the policies and procedures we looked at in the different components for the protocols that we have already issued for phase 1. In addition, there will be some, we will be looking at some specific areas for select states in areas such as discipline and significant disproportionality, as well as child find and evaluation. We, at this point, do not anticipate that there will be formal protocols that we'll be posting for those, but there will be documents that we're going to be using to help with that process. In addition, we are planning a series of other activities that will provide more information for you on in the new year. So thank you.
Great. I'm also going to put in the chat the link to the main DMS page where all of the protocols can be found, the framework document that we referenced. So a lot of the links that we've been putting in throughout this presentation, you can find everything on the link I've just posted, including an overview of the DMS 2.0 system. So Swati, to you for hands raised and opening up the lines for that. We have questions.
I see one hand raised. It's Robin Nelson. I'm gonna allow Robin to talk.
And Dwight and Brenda, feel free to come on camera as well if you want to jump in.
Asking Robin to unmute if they're able to. There might be an accidental hand raise.
That was an accident, sorry.
No worries. Hi, Vasily. Hand raise, I see.
Any other questions related to the information that we've covered today, findings about the process in totality?
One thing that I just want to reemphasize, and I think Kate may have said this earlier today, is that in the coming national TA calls that we'll have in the new year, we hope to be doing similar things with the protocols around data, SPP, APR, and dispute resolution, just to, again, give you a sense of the kinds of things that we have found in the past, make sure you're comfortable with the protocols. We, again, urge you, as we've talked about in the past, to take advantage of all the opportunities that our TA centers are providing to provide support to states that are undergoing monitoring currently or will be in the future. So seems like we may have covered this for now. And I think people are really thinking about, boy, it's time to take a break for the holidays. I know
Exactly.
about that too. I just want to reiterate all the great thoughts that Greg and Valerie shared with you earlier about appreciation for all that you have done and for your patience with us through this process. We wish you the best, you and your family, for a joyous holiday season and a happy new year. And we look forward to joining you again in January.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Have a
Bye-bye.
great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.